All right, let's go ahead and get started. Let's see, make sure the levels are good. You should be able to hear me. All right. You should be able to see me and Intellij. Yes. Good. All right. Stream is working. All right, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started then. So, today I said we were going to talk about how to install the Intellij IDE, so that you can actually start getting making progress on developing applications. So let's go ahead and we'll start with installing the IDE, and we're going to install Intellij. We're going to go ahead and download it. One second. Yeah, we're gonna. You want to go to jetbrains.com/IDEA, hit download, and we're going to install the Community Edition for JVM and Android development. It's free and open source versus the Ultimate you have to pay for. So go ahead and click download. It will download for you. Start the installation. You can't see it most likely, but there's a user access control dialog asking you if you want to install from JetBrains. You hit yes. We start the installation process. Next, and you can go ahead. And you can select, I believe all of these would be fine if you selected them. I'm not going to because I'm on a development machine that I have set up for work. But go ahead and choose these as you see fit. Don't think you are required to. I'll let you know what they do more later. And just install. Oh, you're not seeing the install, are you? Okay. You can just click next. I will show. Yeah, unfortunately, it's a little weird how I'm screen sharing right now. I'm showing a particular window. We'll just go ahead and wait. You've all installed software. I don't really need to show you how to do this. I was just figured for sake of argument I would. But yeah, we'll go ahead and at the end run it or select run it and hit finish, and I will change the window. that is selected to show. If I can select it. There we go. It'll pop up with community edition terms. Click OK, continue. You can send anonymous statistics. For right now, I'm not going to. One second. I'm going to make this so I'm sharing the entire screen. Because selecting the window individually is just not working. There. So you now should be able to see, and I'll need to bring up on my phone chat for class. All right. So you can see the web page in the background and the Intellij Start window, correct? Okay, good. So, anyways, here we are. Here is the Intellij Start window, and we're going to head and start off by just creating a new project. And interesting. They now have Android support built into this. But just click next. We'll make this a command line app. We'll leave the default location alone for right now. And what I'm doing now is making the human readable name of the project, the directory in which it'll go into, and then like I talked about, the path is essentially what you would make a domain name reversed. We'll hit finish. We'll wait for this to finish. I do recommend, if you're especially, you don't have an SDK, in the Dropbox. Okay, if you don't have an SDK, that means you're going to have to go and install the Java SDK first. That's all. If you don't have that right now, it's not a big deal. Just go and grab that and then install that. Yeah. But we're just gonna follow through here. If you don't, I wouldn't even recommend following along yourself at first. I would just watch and try to understand what I'm doing, then go back and do it yourself. Honestly, that's one of the benefits of this recording being, or this video being recorded and available. So hopefully that will work out well for you. Because I have sat through lectures on a product called WebGME. It's something that they made at Vanderbilt at the research institute I worked at. And I shouldn't have tried to follow along and do it because I didn't, it was written in Node, which is I don't know if variant is the right term for it, but a platform for JavaScript. And I wasn't familiar with it, so I was trying to learn that along while watching the lecture and everything. And I would have just been better off just paying attention. So I'm a strong believer in the idea of just watching the first time and then the second time going through and actually following along steps, because then you can pause. If, let's say, your internet speed is slower, you can pause the video and wait until your download is completed. Things like that. My next thing I was going to say is I highly recommend you do read through these next tips. They're unbelievably useful. And I never click the do not show tips, because every once in a while a tip will appear that I don't know. And I'm like, oh, that's useful. I didn't know that. So I'll just close it for now. Make this full screen. And okay, so here's I happen to know this because I use essentially Intellij every day for development. If you triple tap, or I guess it's just double tap, yeah, double tap right shift, it'll bring up a search, and you can search things such as font size. Fonts. Uh, 18 should be okay. Can you read this text up here? I can make it bigger, it's fine. I'll go ahead and just make it 22. So you should be able to see this code. Okay, so what I just did is what you should always do whenever you start a development in any language or platform or anything, is you make a hello world. Can you get it to compile and run and work just basic output? So, and here is how I got it to work. I just hit the run on main. And you can see here's the command that actually ran to make my Java app run. Kind of insane, but you can shorten that a lot. So we now have IntelliJ installed and working. But let's come over to here. Unfortunately, the size of this might be a little small. Yeah, I don't see a way of increasing the font size over here. So, just live with it, basically. It's the best I can suggest, unfortunately. But let's talk about the different parts of the editor, or the IDE. And let's talk about when I call it an IDE, what does that mean? So Notepad is a text editor. I have programmed entire applications in Notepad or Notepad++, which is a free open source. Actually, I don't know if it's open source, but it's definitely a free software. I believe it's open source for Microsoft Windows. That's by far the best simple text editor. And it will do syntax highlighting and all this stuff for you. And that is an amazing tool for development in a lot of different languages, particularly web languages or scripting languages, where you're going to run the code somewhere else, not in a compiled format. The main section here is basically just a very, very graphically impressive Notepad section. The rest of the application is what makes this different than a editor versus an IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment. So we're integrating all of the different parts, or many of the different parts, of the development environment into a single tool chain that you can download as a single piece. Previously, let's talk about the bad old days with C++. You would literally have to go and get the libraries that you wanted to import, the tool chains. You would have to download the individual pieces of software. You would have to configure them individually to make sure that they work. And generally, you would make scripts that would generate the scripts to generate your code through compiler. So you would have tools to make the makefile that would then, the makefile would be used to build the C or C++ project. And that's a lot of work, basically. So here, though, hello world, I change it, hit the play button, wait for it to compile and run, and I get updated text. And so obviously this is much more user-friendly. And we can also do basic command line input and output, things like that. And that's what your first assignment's going to be. I'll tell you now verbally, I'll make the assignment by tomorrow, at latest this weekend. Realistically, I'm exhausted. This week has been horrendous for me. But to the point, so you're going to write a basic command line application that does 4 things, and they're really difficult. And I hope you can all get these and understand them. They're really high level. It's called addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. I know. I'm asking a lot. But realistically, this is basically a proof of concept application for you to be able to prove that you can write code that runs and does the basic operations that we want. But I've already taught you in this class a load of information that can help you build software that's not just working. Building working software from scratch isn't actually that difficult. Building maintainable working software, that's where it becomes difficult. And I've started teaching you the techniques on how to build maintainable software. Does that make everybody understand where I'm getting at, the difference between that? Basically, the use of design patterns and all that other stuff. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. So I'm going to make the assignment very simple. You need to be able to parse 1 or 2 digit operands, 1 or 2 digit parameter commands. So 2 plus 2, and then you're going to print out 2 plus 2 equals, and then the result. 5, obviously. Maybe. Not in this mathematical world, but hey. Obviously 2 plus 2 equals 4, etc. So you're going to want to take your time and be creative. I'm only going to grade upon function for this assignment. And I'm going to give you 2 weeks for it, which is a long time, actually. But I want you to think about how you can write this program to be as extensible and easily maintainable when the next assignment comes around and you have to extend this assignment and add more operations into it. Dun, dun, dun. So, things like modular arithmetic, etc. Find the remainder. Find the whole number division. Because we're not, this class, my goal is not to have you all just be able to program. I want you to be able to make good software that's well designed. So, as long as it's functional on the first assignment, you'll get full credit. But then going forward, we'll have discussions about how there's no correct answer for designing of software. There's just a bunch of wrong answers. And essentially what is going to be the difference is experience. You need to practice designing different implementations and seeing what works and what doesn't. So some patterns mesh well with others. So I think it's component, composite, and iterator work really well together. And some other patterns. The command processor pattern is a pattern that's built up from other patterns. And so you'll start building these chunks of code. I'll call them force multipliers. So if you design your software well in the first place, you can simplify your job later without making the development process that much more difficult in the first place. So some people, some developers hate the idea of a lot of classes. But if your class is like, I don't know, two. If your class is basically this long, in my opinion, it's much better to have a dozen of these classes that all are uniquely named, not in this case main. You would name them something much more logical. And then you would have a class that decides which one of those sub or class implementations to use and create and operate on. Does that make sense? Some people don't like a lot of individual classes. And my opinion on that is they aren't, there's cost benefit to that. Technically, using more classes can be slower, but there are ways of calculating the complexity of individual classes, and the more individual classes that have the lower amount of complexity, the easier it is to test each individual class, and therefore have overall better test coverage for your code, and so therefore much less likely to have bugs in your code. So That's an advanced principle, basically, but I think it's a good idea to start teaching you all that concept now. That way you get in the habit of it. You want to keep your classes as small as possible. You don't want what are called God classes. A God class are basically what we're doing in JDoodle, where everything is in a single class. Or if you're working on a bigger project, you have your networking in one file, and you have all of your logic in one file, and you have the user interface in another file. Well, that logic file is a God class, most likely. So you want to try to break up the logic and UI and all that stuff as much as possible. Does that make sense to everybody? I'm talking in a lot of generalities now, I know that, but that's because we really don't have much to talk about in this class. I just wanted to show you some basics of how things work and give you these ideas that this is the first step in. I get a lot of slack from local developers who think that I put too much emphasis on education, but I think for a lot of people, structured educational courses are better formats for learning than just being told, here, learn on your own. Are there individuals that are better learning on their own? Yes. I myself think that I am 80-20. I prefer classroom for a lot of things, 20% of the time, sometimes my own. So everybody it's a scale. There's no, you're one way entirely or another way only. Unless you're an extreme case, I have examples, but Oppenheimer, for example, was socially illiterate, and so he didn't do well in school, or even as far as I know, finish it. So, all right. My recommendation is, I don't think that. So here's the project. What do they call this? Project U. Oh, just the project view. But we'll talk more about concepts of class construction and good principles. Something you might want to look into is a link that I put in Discord of the concept of construction over inheritance. Or composition over inheritance, and understand that principle. You don't want to go overboard with it. It's like everything. We're taking programming, and there's two ways I like to think of it. We're being chefs, and we have a bunch of raw ingredients, and we need to combine them into something that is edible in a lot of different ways. So you don't want it too spicy. Maybe there's somebody like me who physically can't eat a lot of pepper spice. Black pepper I'm fine with, but that's a different chemical. Or there's somebody that loves hot peppers, but then maybe you make two versions of the dish, and a lot of these concepts. And then I also like to look at it as mathematics. Building up small, learning algebra after you've learned addition and subtraction, learning geometry after you've learned basic algebra, adding them together, etc. So, this is sort of more of a discussion, theoretical course, session of the class, I should say. But we'll talk about the different parts of the IDE. If you have any questions, I have chat down below. That's why, unfortunately, I'm staring down here. I didn't get the software to put chat up on the teleprompter. So If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Pretty much everything is straightforward today. I will leave it up to you to figure out how to do text input until next Tuesday, and then we'll talk about it. But you should be able to finish this assignment this weekend and be done and over with it. And the benefit to that is you'll have time to revise it when you realize, oh, I think I figured out something better. You can try it. And if it doesn't work, then you can get rid of those revisions. My recommendation is to save your code frequently and then back it up every once in a while into a zip folder for right now. Eventually, I'll show you how to use Git, which is a source code management that I highly recommend you learn how to use to start with, nowadays at least. And you'll make what are called commits. And then you can roll back commits and things like that. But that's further in the class. So we'll talk about that. But anyways, I was saying over here is the project window. You can you see how I move the project and the learn. You can move these windows around. Move the build up here. You have a lot of flexibility with how IntelliJ's IDE looks. Okay. So what I was going to say is my recommendation is not to stay on project, but instead go to project files, and it will basically hide all of these other things from you that you don't need to bother with right now. And that's basically, it'll just make it easier for you. So, because if you come back over here into project, you might start trying to edit the output. So this is the compiled. You'll see it's main.class here. I like looking at the decompiler, but we're just going to not deal with that for now. But you don't need to. You basically, you can just come down to your project files, and it's just a lot cleaner to start with. That's all. And all you do is you right click on this folder here and new package. So we can go logic. Main. I like to move main into the main. And then you can also create classes here. So math logic. And you'll notice if I want to make a math logic, you'll see as I type it, it comes up here with a basically an on-screen helper, and you click it, or I'll get rid of type it, math logic, hit enter, and you'll notice it populates the import automatically for us. So often when I was saying, man, I never actually type these imports, it's because the IDE that I use, IntelliJ, automatically does the imports for me. Now, math logic, you come over here, you can toggle back and forth between them. But this math logic doesn't have anything. Void. Print. Ooh, excuse me. Now you'll notice my math logic, I just start typing it, and it auto recommends me what it thinks I want. Run this, it'll print hello world, but you'll notice it's print hello world here from math logic. Also, you hold down control and you'll notice now things are highlightable. Print this, and it'll take me to the method. Come over here, print this, it'll take me to the class. Does that make sense to everybody? I mean, once you get to this point, you have a lot of power now already from the stuff that we've talked about in this class. So we've basically, I'd say, skimmed over the entire basic syntax of Java. So classes, methods, interfaces, input and output. Oh, actually, I don't know if we did input, but it's in the book. It's not difficult. We have talked about static, and how basically at this point you should basically avoid it other than your main method. Somebody was typing. Do you have a comment or question? Yeah, I thought we did. I thought we did do input and output. But if not, if you don't remember input and output, it's definitely in the book, and there's definitely good resources on that online. So, and speaking of the book, I just looked through it, and I've decided we're going to push back the exam a little. I know we talked about having it possibly next week, but I want to go ahead and have it the week on the 23rd, or no, I'm sorry, 21st of October, and it's going to cover chapters 1 to 6 in the book, and the design patterns of factory, builder, and strategy. So it'll cover those 3 patterns. And adapter. I'm sorry. I knew there was a 4th. Adapter, strategy, factory, and builder, and chapters 1 to 6. So it's fairly straightforward. You should be able to do quite well on it. What I'll do is for next week, I'll start having quizzes for you to get familiar with the way I ask questions. That way you're more prepared. And now with the homeworks, what I'll do is I'll have the assignment typed up by at least Saturday at midnight, and it will be due Sunday the 3rd by midnight. So you'll have, no, I'm sorry. Yeah, that would be like 3 days. The 10th by midnight. And then we'll have basically lots of little assignments every week that build on previous work or start new base assignments for us. So every week we'll have an assignment, and we'll start having some quizzes. And now that I feel like we've built a fairly strong foundation, now we can start using the foundation because I feel like, and correct me if you're wrong, you all have an understanding of how classes interact with each other, how interfaces work, how methods are used, how you would design basic classes to do a certain function. And realistically, that's one of the main goals of this course. And so I know we front load a lot of focus on that, and we have front loaded a lot of focus on that in this class. But I think taking our time now and reviewing what we've learned so far, I looked through the book, it's chapters 1 to 6. We have taught a couple topics like static that's a little bit further, but most of it's just chapter 1 to 6, and that's all I'm going to ask for you to be responsible for. And the patterns, and you should be both highly prepared for the exam and the quizzes in this course, and additionally, by the end of the semester, I believe that you'll be highly prepared to start writing software that not only you as a individual developer could work on, but that you could work on as in teams. And that's really the point of this course, is having you learn object-oriented design so that you can work in essentially teams. So, does that make sense to everybody? Okay. Everybody that's here, go ahead and say here. Okay, looks like you might be missing 1 or 2. But, all right. So, I've seen I was gonna say I've seen some others speak previously. Okay. So we've handled our attendance requirement, but which speaking of, I really don't care if you're here during the lecture. It's only for your own benefit, because you want to be able to ask questions and communicate and get feedback from your inquiries quickly, things like that. So, all right. Basically, this is all I wanted to accomplish today, was getting the IDE installed, showing you how you can create packages and classes. You can create other types, and I will show you Kotlin later in the semester, just so you have seen it. It has some benefits. I think it has some drawbacks. I think it is... how do I say this? Less user-friendly to newer developers. I'll put it that way. That's my opinion. There's a bunch of nice things that you can learn how to do, find, replace, and files, things like that in here. Once you learn basic regex and some things like that, those not going to be required in the class to know, but just so you know, there's some nice things in there. VCS, version control system. We will talk about how to use GitHub in the future. So let's see. I would like to eventually get to the point where you can write basic Gradle scripts to build your code using Gradle and execute it through the command line completely. There's benefits to that. Namely, two huge benefits are, one, you can use SSH from literally a phone to SSH into a server, edit the file, compile it, and run it all from the command line, which is super useful. But also you can automate your building of your code and testing of it, so that when you have a bunch of developers working on your code, you use Git and you commit and code and push it to a central repository. And when that central repository has new commits pushed to it, it will run the code and test it and notify everybody if there is any errors in the code. So that way, that person who wrote the bug gets blamed immediately, and they get tomatoes thrown at them. Or I mean stones. No, I'm kidding. But basically, it's a new development practice. Instead of just sitting here, and you do this, and you don't realize there's an error, you hit play. Oh, Java, there's a semicolon expected. You hit enter, run. Or hit null, run this, and then there's a runtime exception. There's a null pointer exception. Things like that. So you would get, on the local development machine, it's useful, but when you can do this stuff all automated, it's really nice. Get web interfaces and a bunch of stuff like that. We'll talk about that later in the semester. I just want to mention it here so you have an idea of different things to look forward to and know about. So any of you that did not yet have Java SDK installed, I would recommend installing at least 11, the JDK 11 Plus. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't followed what's different since 11. I think they're up to 16 or even higher. And so, it's probably fine to install those, to be honest. Like I said, in this class, we're only covering up to 9 because those newer things are only nice to have, not required. So how do you get the Java SDK? Java SDK. Enter. And you get here to the Oracle downloads. Okay, Java 17. I'm assuming, yeah. So, there's 16. We want 17 up here. Sorry. So, you just install this. I would do the bin.exe or MSI. It doesn't really matter. Yeah, if you have 16, we're not going to be using any of the features from the newest Java languages. I honestly don't even know what they are. It doesn't matter to me as an Android developer. I need to learn Kotlin, not Java at this point, and I am learning Kotlin. Going through and in particular, what I've been spending a lot of time in at work is determining best practices for how to Kotlin builder pattern. Yeah, so here is a basically I ended up with this solution based on what their recommendations, and I think they're correct. But the builders we're doing, I didn't even have this constructor here like this. So, as you see, this looks like Java until you start seeing, wait, what's a var? Oh, wait, why is there a question mark everywhere? So this is Kotlin. This is not required, but what I've been doing is trying to figure out what's the best practices for repositories, for testing, for certain design patterns, things like that. So, because we're transitioning our code from Java to Kotlin. So, and unfortunately, that kind of stuff does take a long time to try and evaluate different implementations and things like that. So, you guys, thankfully, don't have to worry about that. The best practices for Java have been well documented for a long time. So, Kotlin is still kind of new. Which menu is the download for 17? Up at the top, depending on if you're running Linux, Mac, or Windows, select that, and then any of these will work. I would recommend the MSI or the EXE. No. Yeah, there is a shortcut in the IDE actually, but my recommendation is just to install it standalone. That way you make sure you don't install any like additional toolbars or whatever nonsense. I always check that. A lot of programs from, I think, SourceForge now come with like the Yahoo toolbar and other stuff, nonsense like that. Not SourceForge. Maybe it is SourceForge. Plus, the reason I recommend installing the separate standalone SDK is you can follow. There are guides. I'm not going to go through it now, but if you want to integrate, excuse me, you want to integrate Java into your Windows command line, and you can run your programs from the command line. There's ways of doing that are nice and clean. Well, possible. Windows command line is never clean. So, anyways, that's about it. You now have the ability to write Java programs and execute them. And the debugging, as you saw, is really nice and useful. Line 14, column 25. I think that's right. Yeah. There should be a semicolon. It's unbelievably useful. So, there some other nice things. Control Alt L will auto indent and format your code for you. Or format. So there's a lot of nice things. Once you start becoming a more experienced developer, you will set you'll make decisions on, you'll see how these are spaces. Should these be tabs or spaces? I personally lean towards tabs, but a lot of people hate that. Because then in the editor you can determine how how big does a tab look? Does a tab look like 2 spaces, 3 spaces, 4 spaces, etc.? So the most important thing is to agree on who the all the developers. So spaces is more universal, but I think tabs is a better philosophy. But a lot of people just don't like it. So whatever, basically. It's a lot of, like I said earlier, there's no correct answer, just a bunch of incorrect answers. So you wouldn't mix tab and spaces. You would have one or the other. The same, particularly for Python, you have to have one or the other. Or maybe they've gone to all spaces required or all tabs required. I honestly forget. But, you saw how to import other classes, so you saw how to make packages. So at this point, you can start making software that is fairly complex. You know the factory pattern, you know the builder pattern, you know adapters, you know the strategy pattern. You can start developing and designing relatively intricate and complex software if need be. Now, we don't have any UI or any networking, which is unfortunately a big part of all software development is those two areas: networking, getting data, databases, storing it locally, or UI is interacting with the user through views and sound and things like that. And logic becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of the code base. But for just writing basic command line applications, you all have a lot of capability now. And so take that as a good indicator. Because at this point in this class, when I took it, we weren't at this point yet. So it's one of the benefits of letting you just read the textbook about the chapters and not necessarily going word by word through them and letting you focus on that. We can talk more about the higher level concepts. So that's about all I had for today. If you have any questions, I'll be available in chat, or you can message me privately if you need. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and stop here for the day. Are there any questions before we head out? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody typing, so I don't think there's any questions. Oh, we have one or a couple. Oh, it'll everything will be posted in Blackboard, so you'll see it there. Don't worry about that. Blackboard is where all your grades will be posted, all your assignments, exams, everything will be handled through Blackboard. Oh, when? I'm sorry, I read that as where. Super tiny text on my phone, hidden by the microphone. When do you plan on posting the project? Yeah, it'll be by this weekend, but it's literally all I've told you. It's just reading in 1 to 2 digit math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. And you'll have to handle the weird exceptions and make it not crash your app. That's it. It will be posted by Saturday at midnight, though. Because I've had a hectic week, and so I might just fall asleep Friday at 5. Honestly. Input validation is always required. The only time input validation is not required is when it is a programming assignment or a like a programming problem from like the ACM or HackerRank or something like that. And even they have variable input sizes. So you'll have an n by n grid. The first number will be the size n. So it'll be like 10, and then you'll have 10 long and 10 wide of a array you have to read in. Or 100 by 100, etc. So even they will have variable input. Yeah, HackerRank I don't believe is actually a good educational tool. I believe HackerRank is a good self-evaluation tool. If that makes sense. I think it's a better practice tool than it is a pure education. Because HackerRank, specifically, you cannot write good maintainable code and pass HackerRank problems. You have to write highly efficient code that uses up less memory. And there are instances where that is important. But I can promise you, companies like Google and Amazon care more if it works and it works well and it's maintainable rather than it works super well or 5 or 10% better and it's non-maintainable. That's really a false dichotomy. There's often not that extreme of examples, but if they could have maintainable code that's easily adjustable and it runs at, let's say, 9, or code that runs at 10, but it takes like teams of people to work on to make any changes, in almost all cases, they'll take the easily maintainable code. Now, there are always exceptions, like returning search results. They need that to be within a millisecond faster. There's a statistic, if a website doesn't load within 200 milliseconds, you instantly lose like 2/3 of viewers or something absurd like that. I forget the exact statistic, but if websites don't load super fast and are super responsive, then your visitor will just leave. So there are exceptions where insane efficiency is useful, but in most cases, it's actually better to just get code that works and can be edited and go from there. And then later, if you need to, you find your code isn't as efficient as you need, then at least you have code that you can read and understand and be like, oh, well, we're reusing excess memory by creating 2 copies of the array here. Maybe we can go back or 3 copies of the array, and maybe we can go back and only make 2, or we can improve the big O notation of this code from n log n to n log n, or something like that, using moving to a much more advanced algorithm. So much slower growth of how complex it is. Things like that. So in general, you want to write highly understandable and maintainable code to start with, and then go back later. HackerRank, you can't do that. It's not fast enough. So, and that's why I think it's a good self-evaluation tool, because you learn both techniques. But I think it's better to learn writing maintainable code first, then learning how to, like, the cheats that allow you to make highly efficient code. That makes sense to everybody? Okay. All right, then. We will go ahead and get out of here. And everybody have a good evening. And if you have any difficulties getting Java or Intellij installed, just let me know. Everybody just calls this Intellij. They don't actually call it the IDE. So it sounds weird just saying it, to be honest to me. So if you get Intellij installed and working, you hit the this, it'll work. I'll show you later some really nice things like this. It's called debugging and how that works. I won't explain it right now, just giving you a sample. Kind of interesting. I'll show you how all that works later. I rearranged some of the content. If anybody's curious and you're looking at the syllabus, I've rearranged some of the content to try and focus on making, because I realized that the order of operations, basically, I prefer this order, and I think you'll be much better prepared in the long run by doing it this way, spending more time on foundational topics, and then we can sprinkle in things like debugging quicker later and more easily and make them more useful. So, but anyways, we will talk about all of that in the future. If you haven't read chapters 1 to 5, go ahead and do so, and then start chapter 6. Chapters 1 to 6 and those 4 design patterns are what are going to be on your exam. So it's fairly straightforward. I'm not going to try and trick you. I'm not trying to cheat you or anything like that. But I need to make sure you know the material. So you have well over, let's see, 1, 2, 3 weeks until the exam. And we'll have quizzes in the meantime, and we'll have more assignments. That way, by I think the 28th or 29th, you'll have a solid understanding of where you're at in the course. Generally, if people show up and they do the work in my courses, they all get fairly good grades. So as long as you're doing the work and you're attempting it and good faith effort, pretty much everyone does very well. So hopefully that will continue. But all right, we will go ahead and end here, and everybody have a good weekend, and we'll go see you again next Thursday. Don't believe we have, next Tuesday. Don't believe there's any breaks upcoming, but I'll check on that. So I know there's holidays and weird things like that upcoming. All right.